this time where everyone's confused, and everyone's confused because everyone's searching, especially in context of life and wholeness.
Yeah.
You're searching for an ultimatum. And the difference between the two rivers is that one has no ultimatum, it's just airy-fairy. And one does have an ultimatum. And that ultimatum is obviously in Christianity, Christ. But when you put that in contrast with other philosophies or beliefs or spiritualities or whatever the case is, there's largely no ultimatum. It's just a reoccurring cycle, like you said. But it's also a meaningless cycle. Like, who really cares if my ancestors 100 years ago lived, died, and it's cycling, it's happening again, and then I live, die, everyone just sort of disappears. Does that make sense? And then you have, obviously, analogies that, like I said, I believe in the actual cycle. I don't believe in reincarnation per se, but I believe that there are ancestral cycles that repeat from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And you see that vividly through the similarities that people share with their parents. Just like people have physical traits that they're born with, derived from their parents, they have spiritual traits that they're sharing. Again, they're not identical, but they're there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And ultimately, every single person that's searching for that ultimatum wants not only the whole picture, but they also want almost, if they can be rebirthed into something that's completely whole, whether they don't care where it comes from.
Yeah.
But if they can be rebirthed into something that's conclusive,
yeah,
and comfortable, and has that light and has that clarity, they will jump on it, right? Now, again, the Bible story is literally a story of rebirth. It's rather than being rebirthed into your physical, ancestral, human-like essence, you're rebirthed into this alternative river that is of Christ, and that river carries all that spiritual clarity and wholeness that every single person is actually looking for.
Yeah.
So I find it's a really big irony. The only thing I think that people dislike is the authority component, because and this is very true about it as well. If you're being rebirthed into an order or initiated into an order, you have to play the game the way that is set by the structure of the order. You can't make it your own. You can't, though it suits you and there's a shoe in that order that fits you perfectly as an individual, you can't tailor the shoe or the structure of how they, let's say, run the company or whatever. You have to conform to whatever those guidelines are. Mm. But that's the same thing with everything in life, ironically. When you get a new job in a company and you're working for a boss, you don't tell your boss how to do his job. He tells you what you need to do, what you need to dress.
It's his boss.
Exactly.
It's his job. Yeah.
So I think what people dislike about Christianity, I think for the larger part, people don't understand. But I think for the ones that do understand, I think the biggest thing that they have to wrestle with is that it is an order and you are subject to...
But it's an order that must evolve, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's something that has to keep evolving and keep changing. Life itself. So one of the biggest things that I have in my head that I always keep in my head is that In order to know the light, you have to know the dark. In order to understand the dark, you have to understand the light.
Mm.
You have to understand both sides. In order for you to walk in the light, you have to understand what is the light and what isn't.
Mm.
Right? So my personal philosophy, because I was taught this, when I was young and I was growing up in church. There's a fence and there's two sides, light and dark. And for you to be on the fence is just as well as being in the dark. But in my personal belief is the fence is exactly where you need to be. You have to understand both sides. You have to truly know everything. You can't conform to just one side. And I feel like, as you say, there's a structure, right? But who gets to determine that structure? A being that created everything. And they say, there's a lot of people that come to me and say, I'll show you on how I can prove God is real. Look around you and tell me there is no creator. I believe there was something that created everything. I would call myself agnostic, not, I believe there's something there. I wouldn't necessarily call it the God of the Bible. I wouldn't necessarily call it the God of the Quran either. It's very particular with Jesus, right? If you really think about it, that guy came in and 3 different sides came out of that: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Christianity itself has got many forms because people cannot conform to just one way of teaching. There's Mormons, there's Catholics, there's so many different parts of Christianity itself, and there's different parts to Islam itself.
That's why.
And they're just opinions. One believes he's a false prophet, right? One believes he was only a prophet, and the other believes he is the Son of God. So who is to say who is right?
That's why we're talking in context. See, when I speak, I'm not referring to groups. I'm referring to...
You're referring to the light and your own path.
Your own path.
Yeah.
So I think very, very important that people do go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You were saying before about, there's 2 sides of the fence and all of that. But ultimately, if you're only looking within to make sense of existence, that's limited in itself. And
of course.
The reason why I say that is because, again, like we said before, there's 8 billion people and every single person has a perceptive reality.
Got their own.
But what's ironic is the book, the Bible, will outlive myself, you, it's outlived our ancestors. So it goes back a lot further.
But even the Bible itself has changed.
Okay, so something about the Bible, and this is why I believe that it's a very, very significant book.
Can I ask you which version do you follow? Well, not follow, but read the most.
Let me explain to you.
Yeah.
Okay. If you have a look at, let's say, the Old Testament in the Bible, it's actually a collection of prophecies.
Yeah.
So prophecies are like a divine prediction, right?
Yeah.
And these prophecies are written by 50, 60, 70 different people in different times, different places, different circumstances, different generations, and they basically all point to the exact same thing, and that thing is a coming Messiah. So this is before Christ, right? Then this figure that's written about thousands of years prior and repetitively and very descriptively, so things like the virgin birth, the crucifixion, all those key points that comprise
the main points, yeah.
Christ, they get fulfilled when Jesus comes into the picture.
Yeah.
And then Jesus comes into the picture. Very few years later, time restarts. It's 2023 now because he was born 23 years ago. Obviously, some people are going to say there's variations and this and that. But whether you like it or not, the world somehow revolves around this figure.
It's very weird because, like, you go over to like China, for example, they've got their whole different yearly cycle. It's completely different. They've got Chinese New Year, and we've got our New Year as well. And ours is based on the Christian. Well, not Christian. I'm just going to say Jesus, right? That's what it's based on. And if you go back and you look at different civilizations and the way, and you look at their gods, for example, Egypt, they ran off a completely different cycle as well. Now, is that because the majority who won back then believed in a certain way, so that's how it's been shaped? Like if you follow like Christianity, right, it goes from that time of Jesus into Rome, and then from Rome gets pushed into the Brits, Europe, and then the English took over the majority of the world, and that's the system that we run off. It's the Brits, the English system that they had put in place, and because we've grown up in that, and that's how that's our fine point of what life is, because that's all we've come to understand. But if you were to take someone before that all happened and have them sit here, and they would have completely different takes on life. So
historically, again, I go back to saying that it's very consistent, because if you read the text, you see it starts off with this problem, okay? Adam and Eve eat from an apple. That's almost like where humanity screwed up.
But there's so many variations of that, of like Lucifer came as a snake and got her to eat that apple. But what if the roles were reversed? Right? What if eating that apple was to break your mind, and it wasn't an apple? I'm pretty sure like it had to be something else. You know